All right, guys, Tyler down here at Emerald City Guitars. We're back in the shop today, and we're gonna look at a very special guitar. This is a 1944 D-28, but even among Golden Era Martins, I think this particular one is very special. And it kind of occurred to me, maybe everyone doesn't know exactly why these pre-war and wartime Martin guitars are so special, so I figured today I'd just kind of go through feature by feature and explain why these are so great and why they're so coveted. So one of the things that makes these pre-war guitars really special is the woods with which they were made. Now, back in this day, Martin made all of their tops with a spruce that's called red spruce. You'll sometimes hear this referred to as Adirondack spruce, which is a little bit controversial, and it'll be a whole thing. Maybe I'll do another video just on that alone. But the red spruce is a type that is extremely stiff, both with the grain and across the grain. It has relatively low density and a generally very musical, light tap tone on the raw lumber, and for that reason, it's kind of the ultimate guitar wood for tops. It's something that builders and players alike really covet. So the backs and sides of these D-28s are made with a rosewood called Brazilian rosewood, which, if you've heard of any tone woods, you've probably heard of that one. It sparks huge heated debates in the community, and it's very controversial. So on these D-28s, Martin used Brazilian rosewood, which they did until 1969, after which they went to East Indian rosewood. And since the 80s, Brazilian rosewood has been extremely regulated, especially in the United States. It's very difficult to get, which has kind of added to the allure among luthiers and players alike. But it's generally accepted that Brazilian rosewood has a very clear high end, a very full and deep bass response. More so than other rosewoods, and it's revered by luthiers and players alike. So next, back in the golden era of Martin, we're made with Honduran mahogany, which is still available today. However, most of it now comes from like Fiji and Belize and stuff. But this stuff they're using back in the day is old growth, right from Honduras. It's the best stuff. It's super stiff and just excellent for transferring tone. So last but not least, the ebony. So we're talking about the bridge and the fretboard. They're ultra high quality, super jet black, really dark and dense, sort of glassy ebony that's tough to find today, but they had it back then, and it looks great and it sounds great. So another aspect in which these pre-war and wartime Martins differ from modern ones is in the construction methods. Most notably on this guitar, it has scalloped X bracing. Now, late 44 is when they kind of started to phase out scallop bracing. They went to tapered bracing. Martin, decades later, went back to scallop bracing, but it was much heavier and did not sound the same at all. So the scalloping on these braces is the one you want. They're very deep scallops, the profile is very unique, which lends itself to the unique sound that these guitars produce. So something that was kind of hand in hand with the bracing is the bridge plate. The bridge plates on these particular guitars were very small and made of maple, but they're still really strong, so they provided support where they needed to and kept the mass as low as possible, kind of under the bridge area, which is the most tonally critical part of the top. So another cool thing about 1944 Martins is that the truss rods in the neck were actually made of ebony. Previously and after they were made of metal, but this was a wartime consideration. At the time, there was a shortage on metal, and companies, including Martin, were cutting back any way they could, which is why there's an ebony rod in this neck rather than a metal rod. So something this ebony rod does in this particular guitar is make the neck much lighter, which actually makes it a lot more resonant in my opinion, and it's definitely a unique sound that you don't get previously or after with the metal rods. So in addition to these construction methods, there are a couple of aesthetic touches that make this guitar really cool. The first of which is the square and diamond inlays on the fretboard. This was phased out in late 44, so this is a very late version of those. They went to dots after these, and a lot of people think that these particular inlays are a much more classy look, and I would probably agree. So another thing you might notice aesthetically about this guitar is that the tuner buttons are white. And again, this is a wartime consideration back when metal was short, so they used plastic for the tuner tips. It's a really cool contrast on the rosewood head cap, and I personally really like the look. So perhaps one of the most iconic things aesthetically about these D-28s is the herringbone purfling around the top here. So the story goes that they sourced this herringbone purfling directly from Germany, so when they ran out in early 1949, they couldn't get more. I don't know if you follow history, but US-Germany relations at that time weren't as cool as maybe they could have been. So around that time, they went to just a regular black-white striped purfling. So kind of to go hand in hand with that, I think it's important to consider the context in which these guitars were built. It was 1944. It was the height of the Second World War. National pride was at probably an all-time high. These people building these guitars in Pennsylvania, this was their career. They weren't just factory workers, they were guitar builders, and I think that really shows in the final product. They're extremely, extremely well made. So also, in 1944, Martin made less than 3,500 guitars total. Of those, I think only a few hundred were D-28s. And within a decade or two, those numbers would triple and continue to rise throughout the late 60s and 70s. I think it's important to bear that in mind in terms of quality control. When numbers get that high, it's very difficult, to keep up and crank out consistently excellent products. But back, when you're making 3,000 a year, it's a lot easier, and these guitars generally were much higher quality. But overall, it's just kind of generally known in the community that 1944 was a really good year for D-28s. I mean, this is only a couple hundred serial numbers away from Hank Williams Sr.'s 1944 D-28 that's in the Country Music Hall of Fame. The Fretboard Journal just last week released its latest issue, on the cover of which is Jeff Tweedy's 1944 D-28, on which he's written extensively, and it's an amazing sounding instrument. Also, if you don't subscribe to the Fretboard Journal, it's a wonderful, wonderful publication. You should absolutely do so. But in any case, the 1944 D-28, it's just special. There's a number of private collections that have 44 D-28s that are kind of famous within the bluegrass flat picking community, and it's just regarded to be an exceptional year, and I think even among exceptional guitars, this one is very special. So after all this, I'm sorry to say that this guitar has sold, so you can't have it. But the good news is, today we're lucky enough to have Jake Eddy in the shop, who, if you don't know, is a legendary bluegrass flat picker, one of the best going today. And he was kind enough to sit down with this guitar and play it for a while so you can see how it sounds.